There's a strange kind of silence that fills a house when two people are in it, but exist on separate islands. That's how it has been between Nina and me for the past year, maybe even longer. Our conversations are mechanical, orbiting around bills, grocery lists, and the inevitable "when will you be back this time?" A question that no longer carries excitement, just expectation. It wasn't always like this. When we first got married, there was passion, late-night conversations, and the way she used to press herself against me before falling asleep, like she couldn't bear the thought of space between us. But time has a way of unraveling even the strongest knots, and my job as a freight pilot had become the wedge that kept pushing us further apart. I know Nina hates my schedule. She's never said it outright, but I see it in her eyes every time I pack a bag, the way she barely meets my gaze at the door. I used to promise that things would change, that one day I'd find a way to be home more. I stopped making those promises when I realized they were nothing more than words I couldn't keep. That's why, when Lisa, my dispatcher, called me with an unusual offer, I listened. "It's an easy run, Jason. No heavy lifting, no customs drama," she said over the phone, her voice carrying that casual smoothness she always used when she wanted something. "It's a personal favor for Robert Griffin. He's got some antique furniture that needs transporting to his private island in the Gulf Islands. Pays 3 times the usual rate. Triple my usual pay?" That caught my attention. "What's the catch?" Lisa chuckled. "No catch. It's a direct run, no flight logs needed, just a quiet delivery. You land, drop off the cargo, and you're back on the mainland in a few hours." Something about the secrecy scratched at my gut, but money talks, and lately, it had been screaming at me. Nina and I weren't drowning, but we sure as hell weren't swimming either. The bakery where she worked barely covered her half of the bills, and my income, while decent, had suffered with recent job cuts. The last thing I wanted was for our financial strain to add another crack in a marriage already covered in fractures. "I'll do it," I said, sealing the deal before my conscience had time to argue. The only thing I didn't realize in that moment was that this job wasn't just going to change our finances, it was going to change everything. I didn't tell Nina about the job. She didn't ask where I was going, and I didn't volunteer the information. It wasn't guilt that kept my mouth shut. It was the simplicity of omission. Sometimes, things were easier left unsaid. She barely looked up from her phone when I packed my duffel bag, her face illuminated by the dull glow of the screen. "I'll be back in a few days," I told her as I zipped up my jacket. She nodded, still not looking up. "Okay." That was it. No goodbye kiss, no be safe. Just okay. I forced myself not to care. Flying over British Columbia's Gulf Islands, I couldn't help but admire the view. The dense forests stretched out like green waves, rolling hills and rocky cliffs meeting the deep blue of the ocean. The airstrip on Robert Griffin's island was private, small, and well-maintained. Exactly the kind of place a man like him would own. Griffin was the kind of businessman who had money spilling out of his pockets, but still wanted more. I'd seen him a handful of times back at the dispatch office, always in tailored suits, the kind of guy who smiled like he already owned you. I landed the plane smoothly and taxied to the end of the strip, where a few of Griffin's men waited to unload. The furniture, antique, heavy, worth more than my yearly salary, was carefully transferred to a transport truck. It should have been an easy in-and-out job. But then, I saw her. Nina. For a second, my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. It wasn't just that she was there. It was the way she was there. Reclined on a sun lounger, wearing a sundress I hadn't seen before, sipping something cold from a glass that glistened in the midday light. And then there was him, Robert Griffin, standing behind her, his hands on her bare shoulders, rubbing sunscreen into her skin. My stomach turned to ice. I told myself it wasn't what it looked like. That maybe, somehow, there was an explanation for this. But the longer I stood there, the more my gut screamed that I was a fool. They were too close, too familiar, too comfortable. I should have confronted her. I should have demanded answers. But instead, I ran. I don't know what overtook me. Rage, panic, disbelief. But suddenly, I was moving, tearing through the dock like a man possessed. I didn't care that I left my plane behind. I didn't care about my job, the money, or the consequences. I stole a boat. I stole a damn boat and raced back to the mainland. I wasn't thinking straight. My thoughts were tangled in a hurricane of emotions, each wave crashing harder than the last. My hands shook as I steered, my vision blurring between the salt spray and the heat of my own fury. Behind me, I heard Nina's voice, faint, distant, calling my name. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. She knew. She knew she had been caught. And now, she was going to pay. The engine roared beneath me, cutting through the waves as I gripped the wheel with white-knuckled fists. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out the cries from the island behind me. Nina's voice. I heard her, panicked, calling my name, but I didn't stop. I didn't turn back. I didn't need to. I had seen enough. Every second I spent on that boat, the image burned deeper into my mind. Her, lounging like a queen, his hands on her bare shoulders, smoothing in sunscreen like it was the most natural thing in the world. The ease between them, the familiarity. It wasn't the first time. How long? That was the question that wouldn't leave my mind. How long had I been played for a fool? How long had she been slipping off her wedding ring when I was thousands of miles away, flying over unfamiliar cities while she stayed back, nestled into the arms of another man? My stomach twisted, while rising in my throat. 3 days ago, I had kissed her goodbye. 3 days ago, she had barely looked at me as I packed my bag. 3 days ago, I thought we were just drifting apart, that maybe things could still be salvaged. Now I knew I had been living in a lie. The coastline grew sharper ahead, the Seattle skyline coming into view in the distance. The stolen boat bounced roughly against the waves, but I barely noticed. My hands were still shaking. I clenched my jaw, trying to stop the rage from boiling over, but it was useless. I needed answers. Not from Nina. From Lisa. I hit the mainland faster than I expected, tying the boat up at an empty pier and walking off like I belonged there. No one stopped me. No one questioned me. Good. Because if anyone had looked at me the wrong way, I might have lost it right then and there. I ignored the missed calls on my phone. 37 calls from Nina. I let them ring. Instead, I called Lisa. She answered on the second ring. Hey, Jason, when were you going to tell me? My voice was sharp, cutting through the casual greeting like a blade. Lisa hesitated. Tell you what? Don't. My grip tightened around the phone. Don't play dumb, Lisa. You knew. You knew about Nina and Griffin, didn't you? There was silence. That was all the answer I needed. How long? I asked, my voice lower now, steady but ice cold. Lisa let out a slow breath. 3 months. I closed my eyes. The number hit me like a punch to the gut. 3 months. That meant while I was breaking my back, taking extra shifts to give us a better future, she was sneaking around with another man. Tom knew too, Lisa admitted after a moment. We both did. We didn't know how to tell you. I let out a humorless laugh, rubbing a hand down my face. So, instead, you sent me on a job that put me right in front of it? Jason, I didn't plan that. I swear. Lisa's voice was urgent now. I thought you'd be back before he arrived. I didn't know you'd see them together. I didn't know whether to believe her. I didn't care. What else? My voice was raw now, my throat burning. Tell me everything. Lisa sighed. It wasn't just casual, Jason. She was planning to leave you. She told Griffin she was going to tell you next month, after his divorce was finalized. His divorce. The pieces were snapping together too fast, like glass shattering and cutting into me all at once. Robert Griffin was married. That meant Nina had been sleeping with a married man. I let out a slow, shaking breath. Who else knows? Lisa hesitated. Besides me and Tom? Yeah. Emily. I stilled. Emily. Robert's wife. I clenched my jaw. I didn't know much about Emily Griffin. Just that she was wealthy, sharp, and not someone you wanted to cross. For the first time since I left the island, something inside me clicked into place. I needed to see her. I barely remembered getting home. I walked into our house, my house, and everything felt wrong. The kitchen where she used to hum while baking, the couch where we used to watch movies, the bed we had shared for 7 years. It was all tainted. The worst part? Her scent was still there. Lavender and vanilla. The same perfume she always wore. The same scent I used to find comforting. Now, it made me sick. My phone vibrated again. Nina. I finally answered. Her voice was frantic. Jason. Jason, please, let's talk. Please. I didn't speak. Jason, I can explain. Explain? I let out a slow breath. Don't, I said. Don't insult me like that. It wasn't what you think. Her voice cracked. We never had sex. We just... I hung up. I couldn't listen to her try to water it down, try to make it seem less than what it was. Because it was already enough. Enough to end us. And now? Now, it was time for payback. I don't remember the drive to Seattle. My mind was a storm. My thoughts a relentless tide pulling me deeper into anger, betrayal, and disbelief. I had landed in one of my darkest nightmares, and yet, the reality of it was worse than anything I could have imagined. Every time I blinked, I saw them. Nina, reclined, relaxed, her bare shoulders glistening in the sunlight as Robert Griffin's hands moved over her skin. The casualness of it, the ease. It was a scene that spoke of repetition, of familiarity. This wasn't something new. This was something well practiced. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles aching from the pressure. My phone had been vibrating nonstop on the passenger seat. Nina's name. Over and over again. Texts. Calls. Voicemails. Desperate attempts at damage control. I refused to pick up. Instead, I made a call of my own. Lisa answered on the first ring. Jason, how long have you known? A sharp silence. Then, a slow sigh. You already know, don't you? 3 months, Lisa. My voice was tight, a barely controlled storm. You knew my wife was screwing around with Griffin for 3 months, and you didn't say a damn word. Lisa exhaled. I wanted to, Jason. I swear to you, I did. But what was I supposed to do? Come to you with a rumor? I only had proof 2 weeks ago. I should have told you then. I laughed bitterly. You think I give a damn when you found proof? You knew enough to warn me, Lisa. You knew enough to... I stopped, grinding my teeth. Why the hell did you send me there? She hesitated. I thought you'd be gone before he showed up. I didn't think. You didn't think. My grip tightened around my phone. And because you didn't think, I got to see my wife with another man. I got to watch another man's hands on her like they belonged there. Lisa was silent. I let out a slow breath, steadying myself. Who else knows? Tom. I clenched my jaw. My boss. The co-owner of the company. The man who had probably known before I did. And Emily. I blinked. Emily Griffin? Lisa sighed. She found out a month ago. I sat there, the weight of that hitting me like a gut punch. Emily had known, and she hadn't warned me. Why? I asked. Lisa hesitated. She's biding her time. You know Emily. She's smart, and she's ruthless. She's not just going to leave him. She's going to destroy him first. Something in my chest twisted. I didn't know Emily Griffin well, but I knew her enough to understand one thing. She wasn't the kind of woman to suffer betrayal lightly. I gripped the wheel and made my decision. Send me her number. I ignored Nina's calls as I pulled into a quiet parking lot just outside the city. I needed a moment to breathe, a moment to wrap my head around what the hell I was going to do next. I didn't want her voice in my head, trying to twist things, trying to convince me it wasn't as bad as it looked. It was exactly as bad as it looked. I scrolled through my phone and found the text from Lisa. A phone number. Emily Griffin. I hit dial before I could second-guess myself. She answered after 2 rings. I was expecting this call, she said, her voice cool and composed. I exhaled. Then you know why I'm calling. A pause. Yes. I waited for her to continue, but she didn't. She was testing me. She wanted to see how much I knew, how much I was willing to admit. I know about Robert and Nina, I said, my voice hard. I know you do too. And I know you're not just going to walk away. Silence. Then, a slow exhale. You're right, she said. I'm not. Something about the way she said it sent a chill down my spine. Meet me, she said. We need to talk. I met Emily Griffin at a small, high-end coffee shop in downtown Seattle. She was already seated when I arrived. Her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. She was beautiful in a cold, untouchable kind of way. Dark hair, sharp cheekbones, and eyes that held no warmth. As I sat down across from her, she studied me carefully, like she was assessing whether or not I was worth her time. Finally, she spoke. "You're angry," she said. I let out a humorless chuckle. "That's an understatement." Her lips twitched, like she found that amusing. "Good," she said, "because I have a proposition for you." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "I'm listening." She took a sip of her coffee, then met my gaze. "I'm going to destroy Robert Griffin." Her voice was calm, matter of fact. "And I want you to help me." I didn't blink. "How?" She tilted her head slightly, watching me. "For starters, we go public. We expose him. The affairs, the financial secrets, everything." My jaw clenched. "You want to humiliate him?" A small smile. "I want to bury him." I exhaled slowly, my mind racing. I had planned to go after Nina. I had planned to make sure she felt the weight of what she had done. But now, sitting across from the one woman who hated Robert more than I did, I realized something. Nina was a symptom. Robert was the disease. If we took him down, she'd go down with him. I met Emily's gaze. "Tell me everything," I said. She smiled. And just like that, the game had begun. The drive to Spokane was long, quiet, and filled with an anger so dense it felt like it could choke me. I barely noticed the highway signs, the changing scenery, or the fact that my grip on the steering wheel had gone stiff. I had left everything behind. My job, my plane, my dignity. I had left behind a life I had spent years building, all because of one undeniable truth. Nina had betrayed me. And now, I was heading to the only place that felt remotely safe, Vanessa's house. My sister. Vanessa had always been the fierce, no-nonsense type. The kind of woman who never took crap from anyone. If there was one person in this world who would tell me exactly how it was, without sugarcoating it, it was her. I pulled into her driveway sometime after midnight. The porch light was still on, glowing dimly in the darkness. I barely had the strength to knock before the door swung open. "Jason." Vanessa stood there in her robe, her arms crossed, her expression shifting from surprise to instant concern. "Jesus, what the hell happened to you?" I exhaled, running a hand down my face. "Can I come in?" She didn't ask any more questions. She just stepped aside and let me in. She handed me a beer and sat across from me at the small dining table, waiting. I could tell she wanted to press me for answers, but she knew better than to push. It took me a full minute before I could say it out loud. "Nina cheated on me." The words felt like poison leaving my mouth. Vanessa's face went stone cold. "With who?" I took a deep breath. "Robert Griffin." Her jaw tightened. I could almost hear her teeth grinding together. "That arrogant son of a..." She cut herself off. "How long?" 3 months. She cursed under her breath, shaking her head. "And you just found out?" "I found out because I walked in on them," I said, my voice bitter. "I got sent on a job to deliver furniture to his private island. And there she was, lying on a damn sun lounger while he rubbed sunscreen on her." Vanessa's nostrils flared. "That bitch." I let out a humorless laugh. "Yeah." Her hands curled into fists. "And where the hell is she now?" I scoffed, blowing up my phone, begging for a chance to explain. Vanessa narrowed her eyes. "Don't tell me you're actually considering listening to her." I met her gaze. "No. I came here because I needed to be anywhere but there. Because if I stayed, I don't know what I would have done." Vanessa studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Good. Because that woman? She doesn't deserve your patience." Just then, my phone buzzed again. "Nina." Vanessa shot me a look. "Put it on speaker." I hesitated for a second, then did. The moment I answered, her voice filled the room. "Jason. Oh my God. You finally picked up." She sounded frantic, desperate. "Please, baby, let's just talk. Please." I stayed silent. "Jason, you don't understand. It wasn't what it looked like." Vanessa rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. I exhaled. "Then explain it to me, Nina." Because from where I was standing, it looked like my wife was lying half naked while another man had his hands all over her. Her breath hitched. We never had sex. Vanessa let out a harsh laugh. Oh, well, then that makes it fine. It wasn't sex, so it doesn't count. Nina's voice faltered. It was just emotional. We were just close. I clenched my jaw. That's supposed to make me feel better? Jason, I made a mistake. I got caught up. I didn't mean for it to happen. It was stupid, and I swear to you, I was going to tell you. I nearly laughed. Oh yeah? When? After your wedding with Griffin? Silence. That was all the confirmation I needed. I shook my head. We're done, Nina. Her breath hitched. No, Jason, please. Don't say that. I love you. Vanessa snatched the phone from my hands and hung up. I blinked. Wow. Okay. She tossed it onto the couch and leaned forward. That woman is trying to manipulate you, Jason. Don't fall for it. I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. I'm not. I swear, I'm not. Vanessa studied me, then sighed. You're staying here tonight. I didn't argue. I didn't have the strength to. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I had been hit by a truck. Vanessa was already in the kitchen, making coffee. You're up, she said without turning around. You got a visitor. I frowned. Who? She turned and leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. Emily Griffin. I went still. She's in the living room, Vanessa continued. Says she wants to talk to you. I swallowed hard, pushing myself to my feet. I walked into the living room, and there she was. Emily Griffin. She sat composed and cold, her designer handbag resting on the couch beside her. Her dark eyes met mine, unreadable. I assume Lisa told you about me, she said smoothly. I nodded. She did. She tilted her head slightly. Then you already know why I'm here. I exhaled. You want revenge. A slow smile. I want justice. I studied her for a moment. And how do I fit into that? Emily leaned forward. You, Jason, are the final piece of the puzzle. I arched a brow. And what exactly are we planning? She smiled again. And just like that, the real war began. Sitting across from Emily Griffin, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just stepped into something far bigger than myself. She didn't fidget. She didn't look around the room. She simply watched me, waiting, calculating. This wasn't a woman in pain. This was a woman on a mission. Vanessa, who had been hovering near the doorway, let out a low whistle. Damn, you're actually scarier in person. Emily's lips barely curved. I get that a lot. Then her gaze flicked back to me. Jason, I assume you don't want this to be drawn out. I leaned back, exhaling. You assume, right? She nodded. Then let's be efficient. I have all the documents prepared for my divorce. I have evidence, emails, phone records, private investigator reports. She said it like she was discussing business deals, not the collapse of her marriage. Robert won't just be losing me. He'll be losing half of everything. I crossed my arms. And Nina? Emily's expression didn't change. She's collateral. If she thought she was going to be the next Mrs. Griffin, she was gravely mistaken. Vanessa smirked. Damn, I like you. Emily finally acknowledged her. Likewise. Then she turned back to me. Jason, your divorce needs to be just as ruthless. You can't let her walk away thinking she can rebuild with Robert. I tensed. I hadn't even started to think about that part. Divorce. Ending everything. But that was what I had to do. It wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a crime scene. I let out a slow breath. I don't just want the divorce. I want her to feel it. Emily nodded, pleased. Then we'll make sure she does. The next morning, I hired Ralph Hudson, a brutal divorce attorney with a reputation for ripping cheaters apart in court. I wasn't about to let Nina dictate how this ended. He sat across from me in his downtown office, flipping through paperwork. You're lucky, he muttered. Washington is a no-fault divorce state. But with the evidence Emily provided, we can make sure Nina gets the bare minimum. I smirked. Good. Ralph glanced at me. Do you want her name tied to Griffin in the paperwork? I didn't even hesitate. Absolutely. Nina had chosen to betray me in broad daylight. She had chosen to disrespect our vows. Now, she could live with the stain of her choices. That afternoon, Nina showed up at my sister's house. I saw her through the window first, her eyes puffy from crying, her hands shaking as she hesitated before knocking. Vanessa stood next to me, arms crossed. You want me to answer? I shook my head. No, I got this. I opened the door. For a second, we just stood there, staring at each other. Her bottom lip trembled. Jason, I didn't speak. She stepped forward. Can we please talk? Please. I let out a slow breath. Talk. Her voice cracked. Not here. She glanced at Vanessa, then back at me. Just us. Vanessa scoffed. Not happening. Whatever bullshit excuse you're about to feed him, I'm going to hear it too. Nina winced. Vanessa, please. No, I cut in, my voice flat. You don't get to dictate the terms here. Tears pooled in her eyes. I made a mistake. I laughed. A mistake? I leaned against the doorframe. Nina, a mistake is forgetting to pay a bill. A mistake is leaving the oven on. A mistake is not sneaking around behind your husband's back with a married man. She flinched. Jason, You didn't even have the decency to tell me yourself. I had to see it. My voice was like ice now. And don't you dare insult me by saying it wasn't physical. She cried harder. I swear to you, we never. I cut her off. You were going to marry him, Nina. Her breath hitched. I watched the color drain from her face. She hadn't realized I knew that. Did you think I wouldn't find out? My voice was sharp. You thought you'd divorce me quietly, then slide into his mansion like nothing happened? She shook her head rapidly. No, I didn't mean. Robert played you. She froze. I stepped forward, pulling out my phone. Here, I said, opening the file Emily had sent me. Take a look. She hesitated before taking the phone, her fingers trembling. Her face crumbled as she saw photo after photo of Robert with other women. Different hotels, different cities, different women. Robert Griffin was a serial cheater. And Nina? She was just another disposable mistress. Her knees buckled. She stumbled back, gasping. I caught my phone as she nearly dropped it. You weren't special, Nina, I said coldly. You were just his next temporary distraction. She shook her head violently, her sobs ragged. No. He told me he loved me. He said. I let out a humorless chuckle. And you believed him? She clutched her stomach like she was about to be sick. Oh my God. I didn't feel bad for her. Not one damn bit. She had made her choice. Now, she had to live with it. 3 days later, the divorce papers were served. Nina tried to call. I never answered. Robert? He tried to clean up his mess, but Emily wasn't having it. Within a week, she had filed for divorce. Within 2, she had started gutting his business. His world was falling apart. And Nina? Nina was stuck in the wreckage. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt like I had one. But standing in my empty house, surrounded by the memories of a marriage that never truly existed, all I felt was tired. So damn tired. I had lost so much. But maybe, just maybe, I had cleared the way for something better. There's a strange kind of emptiness that follows destruction. You expect to feel triumphant, maybe even relieved. But what settles in is something quieter, something heavier. The papers had been served. The ink was drying on a marriage that was already dead. Nina had tried to reach me, but I hadn't answered. I had nothing left to say. And Robert? He was drowning. Emily Griffin wasn't just divorcing him. She was obliterating him. I kept up with the news through Lisa and Tom, though I hardly had to ask. The gossip spread like wildfire through the aviation circles. The Griffin name was crumbling. Emily had been meticulous in her takedown. The moment she filed for divorce, she went after his business, his reputation, his wealth. She froze bank accounts, stripped assets, and leaked his affairs to the press. The result? Griffin Aviation, the empire Robert had spent years building, was hemorrhaging money. Clients pulled out. Investors backed off. And suddenly, Robert Griffin was no longer untouchable. It was poetic justice, really. The man who thought he could have everything was now losing everything. And the best part? Nina was caught in the fallout. I heard about it through Lisa first. She called me late one evening, her voice dripping with amusement. You're not going to believe this, she said. Try me. She laughed. Robert dumped Nina. I blinked. Already? The moment Emily's divorce became official, she confirmed. Word is, he cut her off completely. No more future together. No more promises. Just gone. I let out a slow breath. I should have been surprised. But I wasn't. Nina had left me, thinking she was trading up. And now? She had nothing. Lisa kept going. She was still working at the bakery, but after your divorce was finalized, people started talking. I frowned. What do you mean? Lisa sighed. Jason, people don't respect cheaters. Her co-workers turned on her. Customers whispered behind her back. Even the manager started cutting her hours. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling. The consequences of her choices were finally catching up. Lisa hesitated. Do you feel bad for her? I thought about it. The truth? No. She had made her bed. Now, she had to lie in it. Meanwhile, my life was moving forward. I didn't go back to flying. I couldn't. The idea of stepping into a cockpit again, of going back to a career that had stolen so much of my time, that had cost me my marriage, felt unbearable. Instead, I took a leap. My brother, Daniel, had been running his own custom woodcrafting business for years. He had always told me I had a knack for it, but I had never taken it seriously. Now I had nothing to lose. So I started working with him. The first few weeks were rough. I wasn't used to the rhythm, to the long hours of sanding, carving, and staining. But something about it felt right. It was honest work. Work that didn't rely on schedules or flights or time zones. Work where I could see the results with my own hands. It didn't pay as much as flying. But for the first time in a long time, I felt free. One afternoon, Daniel and I set up a booth at a local artisan fair. The air was thick with the smell of fresh sawdust and varnish, the sounds of customers chatting and street musicians playing in the background. We had barely been there an hour when someone stopped at our display. A woman. She was dressed casually but elegantly, her long, auburn hair pulled into a loose ponytail. Her eyes traced over the furniture with genuine interest. She looked up at me. You made these? I nodded, wiping my hands on my apron. Yeah. My brother and I. She smiled. They're beautiful. There was something in her voice. A genuine admiration. I found myself studying her in return. She was soft-spoken but confident, the kind of person who carried themselves with quiet authority. She gestured toward a carved oak table. Do you take commissions? I nodded. We do. She smiled again. Great. I'm Clara, by the way. I run an art gallery in town. We showcase local craftsmanship. I raised a brow. So, what? You're offering me a spot? She tilted her head, considering me. Maybe. Then, she held out her hand. Why don't you drop by the gallery sometime? Let's talk. I hesitated, just for a second. Then, I shook her hand. All right, I said. All right, she echoed, her lips curving into a small, knowing smile. That night, as I sat in my apartment, something dawned on me. It had been months since the divorce. Months since Nina shattered our marriage. And yet, for the first time since it all fell apart, I wasn't thinking about her. I wasn't drowning in anger or regret. I was thinking about something else. Something new. Something possible. Clara. Meanwhile, Nina's life was unraveling. The bakery cut her hours again. She had no savings. No job stability. No support. And when I heard through Lisa that she had been seen crying in her car outside Griffin Aviation, I knew. She was realizing the truth. She had ruined everything. And unlike me, she had no way out. The sawdust smelled different that morning. Lighter. Like it wasn't clinging to me as much as it used to. I ran my hands over the polished mahogany surface of the table I'd been working on, tracing the wood grain as the sun filtered through the workshop's windows. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. It wasn't a feeling I was used to anymore. Not since Nina. But things were changing. My work with Daniel had become more than just a way to pay the bills. It was something I was beginning to love. Something that made sense in a world where, for a long time, nothing did. And then there was Clara. I still wasn't sure what to make of her. She was different. There was no expectation in the way she spoke to me, no judgment. She was sharp but not cruel, direct but not cold. When she had offered to showcase my furniture in her gallery, I had been skeptical. Now, standing here, staring at the piece she had requested, I found myself wondering, was this the beginning of something? Or was I just grasping for a distraction? Later that afternoon, I drove into town and parked in front of Foster Art Gallery. The building was sleek and modern, all glass and dark steel, with paintings and sculptures displayed in its tall windows. The kind of place I wouldn't have thought I belonged in a year ago. Clara was waiting inside, dressed in deep green, her hair tucked behind one ear. She smiled when she saw me. "You actually came." I smirked. "What, you thought I wouldn't?" She shrugged. "You have the look of a man who runs from things." I stiffened. "I don't run." Her eyes flickered with something knowing. "No?" I wasn't sure what to say to that, so I handed her the photos of the table I had designed for her gallery. A perfect distraction. She studied them, running her fingers over the images. "This is beautiful." "Thanks." She tilted her head. "You're more talented than you realize, Jason." I chuckled. "You don't even know me." Her gaze met mine. "Not yet." That evening, Lisa called me. "I saw Nina today," she said, her voice carrying that same blend of curiosity and pity that made my stomach tighten. I exhaled. "Do I want to know?" "She looked rough," Lisa admitted. "She's lost weight. Looked tired. Like she hasn't been sleeping." I didn't respond. Lisa hesitated. "I think she's regretting everything." I let out a short, sharp laugh. "Yeah? Regret won't change a damn thing." "I know," Lisa murmured. "But Jason, she's been asking about you." My jaw clenched. Let her wonder. Silence stretched between us. Then, Lisa sighed. "I figured that's what you'd say. Just thought you should know." I hung up, staring at the darkened city skyline through my window. I had spent so long drowning in the memory of her. But now? Now she was the one drowning. The next few weeks blurred together. The gallery launched my first piece, and to my shock, it sold almost immediately. Clara was thrilled. She wanted more. She wanted a collection. And for the first time in a long time, I had a purpose. Then, one night, she called me. "I'm at O'Malley's," she said over the phone. "Come have a drink with me." I hesitated. I hadn't gone out in months, but something about her voice, soft, teasing, a little slurred, made me want to say yes. So I did. She was already on her third drink when I arrived. "Jason," she greeted, eyes bright, cheeks flushed. "You actually came." I smirked, sliding onto the bar stool next to her. "What are we celebrating?" She raised her glass. "Your success." I chuckled. "It's just one table, Clara." She shook her head. "It's the beginning of something. Don't downplay it." We talked. We drank. And somewhere between the laughter and the whiskey, I realized something. I liked being around her. I liked the way she didn't treat me like I was broken. I liked the way she looked at me, like I was a man, not a cautionary tale. Then, she reached across the table, resting her fingers against my wrist. "Jason," she murmured, her gaze heavy, "why are you still holding back?" I swallowed. "I don't know what you mean." She leaned in, her voice dropping. "Yes, you do." The space between us was small, too small, and for a moment, I thought about closing it. Then I exhaled, shaking my head. "Clara, I'm not ready for this." Something flashed in her eyes. Disappointment? Understanding? Then she pulled back, nodding. "Okay." But something had shifted. Something that wouldn't go back to the way it was. The next morning, she called me. "I shouldn't have pushed," she said, voice softer now. "I'm sorry." I exhaled. "You don't have to apologize." She was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" "Yeah." "Are you holding back because of her?" I tensed. She didn't need to say Nina's name. I let out a slow breath. "Maybe." Clara sighed. "That's what I thought." Another pause. Then, softly, "I hope one day, you let yourself be happy again." The call ended, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure what I wanted anymore. Meanwhile, in a different part of town, Nina was spiraling. She had been fired from the bakery. Her landlord was threatening to evict her. And Robert Griffin had completely vanished. Her world was crumbling. And unlike me, she had nothing left to rebuild with. The problem with betrayal isn't just the act itself. It's the aftershock. It's the way it lingers, redefining every memory, twisting every moment you once thought was real. I had spent months trying to move forward, trying to convince myself that Nina was my past and that she had no power over me anymore. And yet, even as I stood in my workshop, running my hands over the smooth finish of a newly crafted dining table, my mind wouldn't let go of what Clara had asked me the night before. "Are you holding back because of her?" I had wanted to deny it, wanted to say Nina was nothing but a scar now. But the truth? I wasn't sure. The next day, I got a call from Daniel while I was at the gallery with Clara, finalizing the designs for our next furniture collection. "You need to come to the shop," Daniel said, his voice low. I frowned. "Why?" There was a pause. "Nina's here." I stiffened. "She looks bad, Jason," Daniel added. "Like really bad." Clara, standing next to me, must have seen the change in my expression. "What is it?" I exhaled. "Nina." Something flickered across her face. Understanding, maybe even concern. I rubbed a hand down my face. "I need to go." She nodded, but her voice was careful. "Jason, be sure you know why you're going." I didn't answer, because I didn't know. When I pulled up to the workshop, I spotted her immediately. She was sitting on the wooden bench outside, hunched over, her shoulders shaking. I had never seen her like this. Her once perfectly styled hair was unkempt, her clothes wrinkled, her face hollowed out with exhaustion. This wasn't the woman who had cheated on me. This was someone who had lost everything. I stepped forward. "Nina." Her head snapped up. The moment she saw me, she burst into tears. She jumped to her feet, closing the distance between us in seconds. "Jason, please, please, just listen to me." I didn't say anything, because I wasn't sure what there was left to say. Daniel had gone inside, giving us space. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, Nina exhaled shakily. "I lost my job." I raised a brow. "Yeah? And whose fault is that?" Her lips trembled. "I made a mistake." I scoffed. "A mistake?" Her eyes snapped up to mine. "I regret it, Jason." Her voice was desperate now. "I regret everything. I ruined my life, and she swallowed hard. "I don't know what to do." For the first time since she cheated, I actually looked at her, really looked at her, and all I saw was someone lost. Nina had been so sure she was upgrading, so sure she had made the right choice. But Robert had thrown her away the moment Emily finished destroying him. And now, she was paying the price. I let out a slow breath. "What do you want from me, Nina?" She sucked in a sharp breath. She faltered. "I don't know." I studied her for a long moment. Then, finally, I shook my head. "Nina," I said quietly, "I don't hate you." Her lips parted slightly. "But that doesn't mean I can forgive you." Tears streamed down her face. "I don't expect you to." I exhaled. "Then why are you here?" She opened her mouth, then closed it, because she didn't have an answer. And maybe, deep down, she knew. She was here because she had nowhere else to go. Not because she wanted me back. Not because she wanted to make things right. But because I was the last piece of stability she had left. And that wasn't my burden to carry. I walked back into the shop without another word. I didn't look back. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "That was something." I sighed, running a hand down my face. "Yeah." He watched me carefully. "You okay?" I nodded. "I think I am." And for the first time in months, I actually meant it. That night, I called Clara. She answered immediately. "Jason?" I hesitated for a second. "Can I see you?" Silence. Then, a quiet smile in her voice. "Yes." We met at her gallery after hours. The space was dimly lit, the glow of track lighting casting warm shadows over the artwork lining the walls. Clara stood by the large window, arms crossed, watching me as I approached. I stopped in front of her. "Nina came to see me today." Clara's expression didn't change. I figured she would. I exhaled. "She regrets it." Clara's lips pressed together. "That doesn't mean you owe her anything." "I know." She studied me for a moment. "What do you want, Jason?" I swallowed. Then, finally, I told the truth. I want to stop feeling like she still has a hold on me. Clara's expression softened. That will take time. I nodded. I know. She tilted her head. And what do you want from me? I hesitated. Then, before I could second-guess myself, I closed the distance between us. Her breath hitched slightly as I reached up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I want to see where this goes, I murmured. Clara's lips parted. Are you sure? I exhaled. Yeah. For the first time, I actually was. She studied me for a moment longer. Then, slowly, she smiled. Good. Meanwhile, Nina packed her bags. She was leaving town. No job, no money, no future. And as she sat in her empty apartment, staring at the life she had thrown away, she realized something. She had lost the only man who ever truly loved her, and she would never get him back. There was a difference between moving on and running away. For months, I had told myself that I wasn't doing the latter, that I was taking things slow, healing at my own pace. But standing there, watching Clara move between the displays in her gallery, the truth settled over me like a weight I could no longer ignore. I had been stalling, and Clara knew it. She never said it outright, never pushed me beyond what I was willing to give. But I could see it in the way she looked at me sometimes, like she was waiting. And tonight, she was finally done waiting. We had met at her place after work, a bottle of red wine between us, soft jazz playing in the background. Clara had always been poised, self-assured, but tonight, there was something different in the air, something unspoken. She leaned back against her kitchen counter, swirling the wine in her glass. You're thinking too much. I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. Am I? She arched a brow. You always do. I smirked, taking a sip of my drink. And what exactly am I thinking about? Clara's gaze didn't waver. About whether this, she gestured between us, is real, or if I'm just a rebound. I stiffened. She had cut straight through me like a damn knife. Clara sighed, setting her glass down. Jason, I'm not going to pretend I don't know where your head is. I know you're still untangling yourself from your past. I swallowed hard. Clara. But I need to know something, she continued. If I'm just a distraction, if I'm just something to fill the space Nina left behind, then tell me now. I put my drink down, my jaw clenching. It's not like that. Then what is it like? I exhaled, looking away. I don't know. Silence. Then, a soft laugh. I frowned, looking back at her. What's funny? Clara shook her head. You're funny, Jason. I raised a brow. How? She stepped closer, crossing her arms. Because you think you have to have all the answers right now? I ran a hand over my face. Clara. No, she cut in gently. You don't have to love me. You don't have to promise me forever. But if you're still living in the shadow of your ex-wife, if she still has a grip on you, then I need to know. I let out a slow breath, meeting her gaze. She doesn't. She tilted her head. Are you sure? I swallowed hard. Yeah. Clara studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Okay. I exhaled, the tension in my shoulders loosening. Then she smirked. Now, kiss me before I change my mind. I didn't hesitate this time. I closed the distance between us, cupping the back of her neck, pressing my lips to hers. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was just trying to forget Nina. I felt like I was finally choosing something new. The next morning, I woke up in Clara's bed, the soft glow of sunlight streaming through the curtains. She was still asleep beside me, her bare shoulder peeking out from under the sheets, her hair splayed across the pillow, and as I lay there, watching her breathe, I realized something. I didn't regret a damn thing. For the first time since my marriage had imploded, I felt peace. I felt whole. Meanwhile, Nina was spiraling. She had lost everything. Her job, her apartment, her stability. And now? Now, she was alone. She had called Robert one last time, hoping, praying that he would help her. But all she got was a cold, dismissive, "You made your bed, Nina." The call disconnected, and for the first time, true regret settled in her chest like a stone. She had thrown away a good man for a fantasy that had crumbled in her hands. And now, she had to live with that. Forever. 2 weeks passed. Clara and I had fallen into something easy, something real. She didn't press me for answers I wasn't ready to give, and I didn't pretend I had it all figured out. It was new. And for the first time in years, new didn't scare me. Then, one afternoon, while I was working in the shop, Vanessa showed up. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching me. "So, you and Clara, huh?" I smirked. "You stalking me now?" She rolled her eyes. "Lisa told me." I sighed, setting down my tools. "Yeah, it's good." She studied me for a second, then nodded. "I'm happy for you, Jason." I raised a brow. "You actually mean that?" She smirked. "For once, yeah." I chuckled. "Wow, must be a first." Then she hesitated. And I knew. There was more. I sighed. "What is it?" Vanessa exhaled. "Nina left town." I stilled. She continued. "Lisa said she packed up what little she had and left. No forwarding address. No big goodbye. Just gone." I nodded slowly. "Huh." Vanessa searched my face. "You okay?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. Then, finally, I nodded. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I am." And for the first time in a long time, it was the truth. Meanwhile, Nina sat alone at a Greyhound station. A single duffel bag beside her. No home, no husband, no plan. Just the weight of every mistake she had ever made. And the realization that she had lost the best thing that ever happened to her. Forever. Time had a strange way of moving after everything settled. The chaos had ended. The dust had cleared. Nina was gone. And yet, I still woke up some mornings with the faintest trace of old habits. I would glance at my phone, half expecting one of her messages. I would check the locks at night, still accustomed to making sure the house was secure for both of us. Little things. Ghosts of a past life that hadn't fully let go. But every time I found myself drifting into those thoughts, I reminded myself, she was gone. And I didn't need her anymore. My days were simpler now. Mornings were spent at the shop, my hands covered in sawdust, the sound of drills and sanders filling the air. The work was honest, real, and I loved every second of it. And in the evenings, I had Clara. It was still new. We weren't rushing anything. She didn't need me to be perfect, and I didn't need her to fill a void. But there was something easy about being with her, something I hadn't realized I was missing. She made me feel like a man again, not a betrayed husband, not a cautionary tale, just me, and I liked that. One night, after a long day at the shop, I showed up at Clara's gallery unannounced. She was inside, moving pieces around for a new exhibition. The place was empty, just her and the art. She didn't hear me at first. She was too busy focusing, biting her lip as she studied a large oil painting. I leaned against the doorframe. "You always talk to the paintings, or just the expensive ones?" She turned, startled for a second, before rolling her eyes. "Cute." I smirked. "Figured." She crossed her arms, tilting her head. "What are you doing here?" I shrugged. "Thought I'd see you." She raised a brow. "Just like that?" I stepped closer. "Just like that." She studied me for a moment, something unreadable in her expression. "You look good today." I chuckled. "I always look good." She laughed, shaking her head. "And there it is. Cocky Jason returns." I grinned. "Missed me?" She smirked. "Maybe." We ended up back at her apartment, curled up on her couch, drinking wine. It was easy, the way we fit. She had a way of making silence comfortable, of not needing words to fill space. Eventually, she sighed, resting her head against my shoulder. "Do you ever think about her?" I tensed slightly. She didn't need to say the name. I exhaled. "Not in the way I used to." Clara was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "Good." I tilted my head, looking down at her. "You ever think about him?" Her lips pressed together. "Not in the way I used to." Fair enough. She had her own ghosts. I had mine. And maybe that was why we understood each other so well. Weeks passed, and life settled into a rhythm. My work was thriving. Clara's gallery was gaining more recognition. And together, we were figuring things out. Then, one night, everything shifted. Clara showed up at my place, drunk. It was the first time I had ever seen her that way. Her makeup was smudged, her dress slightly wrinkled, her hair messier than usual. I opened the door, frowning. Clara? She wobbled slightly, then grinned. Jason. I stepped forward, steadying her. Jesus, how much did you drink? She giggled. Enough. I sighed, guiding her inside. Come on. She plopped onto my couch, stretching out. You're a good man, you know that? I sat beside her. Yeah. She nodded. I mean it. I studied her. What's going on, Clara? Her expression shifted then. The playfulness faded, replaced by something raw, something vulnerable. She exhaled. I think I'm falling for you. I went still. She looked up at me, her gaze glassier than usual, but honest. And I don't know if that scares me or excites me. I swallowed. Clara, I know you're still figuring things out, she interrupted. I know you're still healing. But I need to know if I'm wasting my time. I exhaled slowly. I hadn't been expecting this. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. She looked down, running her fingers along the couch fabric. I told myself I'd never be that girl, you know? The one who waits around, hoping someone will be ready for her. I frowned. Clara, you're not? But I think I already am, she whispered. I stared at her, my chest tightening. I didn't want to hurt her. I didn't want to lose her. But I also didn't want to lie. So I told her the truth. I don't know if I'm ready yet. She swallowed hard. But do you want this? I reached for her hand, threading my fingers through hers. Yeah. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. Okay. Then, she smirked. Now, put me to bed before I pass out on your couch. I chuckled, shaking my head. Come on, troublemaker. The next morning, she woke up with a headache and an apology. I told her there was nothing to apologize for. Because the truth? She had only said what I had been too afraid to admit myself. And as I watched her sip coffee across from me, her hair messy, her eyes still sleepy, I realized something. I wanted this. I really, truly wanted this. Maybe it wasn't perfect. Maybe I still had scars. But for the first time in a long time, I wanted to fight for something again. Meanwhile, Nina was gone. No contact. No messages. Nothing. And that was how it needed to be. Because the man I had been with her, he didn't exist anymore. I was someone new now. And for once, I actually liked who I was becoming. 3 years later, I stood at the entrance of an art festival in Portland, running my fingers over the smooth wooden edge of one of my latest pieces. The smell of varnish mixed with fresh paint filled the air, blending with the distant scent of roasted coffee and cinnamon pastries from a nearby vendor. The chatter of visitors hummed around me, people admiring handcrafted work, appreciating the time and effort that went into every creation. I never thought I'd be here, standing in a booth displaying my work, no longer defined by the wreckage of a failed marriage, no longer carrying the weight of betrayal like a cross I couldn't put down. And yet, here I was. And I was happy. More than happy. Because standing beside me, cradling a small curve of her belly with one hand, was Clara. I glanced at her, watching as she absently rubbed her growing stomach while flipping through the pages of a potential client's order book. The sight sent a strange warmth through my chest, something I had only begun to understand in the past year. She caught me staring and smirked. You keep looking at me like that, and people are going to start thinking you're in love with me or something. I grinned. I am. She rolled her eyes but smiled, reaching for my hand and giving it a small squeeze. Well, good. Because I think you're stuck with me. I kissed the back of her hand. Wouldn't have it any other way. Our journey hadn't been perfect. It had been slow, careful, filled with hesitation and small steps forward. I hadn't been ready for Clara at first, not the way she deserved, but she had never pressured me. She had let me come to her when I was ready. And when I did, she never looked back. Now, we were building something together, not just in business, but in life. She still ran her gallery, and my woodwork had become one of her top-selling collections. What started as a simple booth in a local market had turned into a thriving workshop, with clients placing custom orders months in advance. It wasn't just work anymore. It was a life. Our life. Later that night, after the festival, we drove back to our house, a cozy cabin-style home on the edge of town, tucked between tall trees and open fields. It wasn't a mansion, but it was ours. Clara kicked off her shoes the moment we walked in, groaning as she stretched her back. Remind me never to stand for 10 hours straight again while pregnant. I chuckled, hanging up my jacket. I warned you, didn't I? She shot me a look. Yeah, but I'm stubborn, remember? I smirked, stepping closer and wrapping my arms around her waist. I remember. It's one of your best and worst qualities. She scoffed, playfully smacking my arm. You love it. I kissed her forehead. I do. She softened, resting her head against my chest. We made it, huh? I exhaled, rubbing my hands along her back. Yeah, we did. And we had. No more ghosts. No more looking over my shoulder, wondering if I was still haunted by my past. I was here. With her. With our future. 1 week later, I got an email. From Nina. I stared at my phone for a long moment, my heart not racing, not breaking, just still. It was short. Jason, I know I don't deserve a response, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Truly. I lost everything, and I know that's on me. I hope you're happy now. You deserve to be. Nina. I let out a slow breath. For the first time since our marriage had ended, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel anything. And maybe that was the biggest sign of all. I had healed. I deleted the email. And I never thought about it again. 1 month later, our daughter was born. Holding her in my arms, feeling her tiny fingers curl around mine, I knew. Everything, every painful moment, every loss, every heartbreak, had led me here. To this. To Clara. To our family. I pressed a kiss to my wife's forehead, whispering the words I hadn't said in years. Not with this much certainty. I love you. Clara smiled sleepily, squeezing my hand. I love you too. And for the first time in a long time, I had everything I ever needed.